Chapter 7. The nightmare continued. The blackness of the moonless night covered the old green Ford like a smothering blanket that nothing could crawl out from under. John Cray had been given the used car by his father for a wedding present just 6 months earlier. He'd had it repainted and some much-needed bodywork done first. But now, as the starter ground on and on, he wished he'd worked on the engine first. A stalled motor, probably nothing more than a loose switch or wire, had them 4 short kilometers from the spaceport, sitting in the most dangerous of dark nights. 4 impossible kilometers, with the aliens swarming closer to this area every hour. Damn it! He pounded on the wheel. Start, damn you! He fought the ignition one more time, but it was clear from the grinding sound that came that there would be no more distance from this car tonight, or maybe ever. He knew that much about cars. And about aliens. John? Linda said softly and touched his arm. Her soft touch calmed him somewhat, and he stopped. Angrily, he twisted the key to off and turned to face his beautiful bride in the faint light from the dashboard. He could see the worry on her face. Her long blonde hair was pulled back tight, making her face like a small white moon in the faint light. Her clean soap smell filled the car with a fine perfume. All he wanted to do was hold her, curl up in a warm bed, tell her they would be fine. But they wouldn't be fine until somehow they reached the spaceport and joined the evacuation off Earth. In this area of the planet, that was their only hope, and they both knew it. He reached out and patted the soft skin of her leg, doing his best to fight down his panic and to reassure her as well as himself. If we stay here and keep quiet, we should be all right until someone comes along. She nodded. She had trusted him since that first night they had met at the Christmas party. She worked as an account executive for the Grant Corporation, the same corporation he did troubleshooting work for on computers, the same company he spied for after this night. If there's no traffic tonight, we'll walk at first light. We should be able to make it to the port in a few hours. The corporation will have enough ships to get us to Earth orbit. She was about to say something when, as he watched in shocked terror, an alien appeared out of the dark shadows directly behind her. It was a huge creature with a black, bony shell and thousands of teeth in saliva-filled jaws. Before he even had time to scream a warning, it smashed the window behind Linda, and with a 4-fingered hand around her chest, yanked her back against the door. No! He frantically reached for her, straining against the seatbelt he still wore. John! She screamed. Her eyes were wide with terror and disbelief. John! She fought at the hand on her chest, fighting to pull the slick black fingers off her. Behind her, the alien hissed, deep and long. Another alien hand snaked in the window on the other side of her, and the awful smell of sulfur and rotten eggs filled the car like a choking gas. He grabbed for her, but the seatbelt still held him, and all he could touch across the car was her leg. He grabbed it and tried to pull her away from the bug as she fought madly to pry the hands away from her. Then, with a sudden hard yank from the alien, she was bent over double, her skin pulled roughly from his grasp. Her seatbelt snapped, and with her head between her legs, she was pulled roughly through the window. Her legs and back left bloody strips of skin and cloth on the broken glass. No! He screamed again, fighting to free himself from the safety belt. But it seemed to be snagged on something. Or he wasn't pushing the right area of the clasp, or something. It wouldn't release. He fought at it, ripping at it, struggling to free himself so he could save his wife. But the nightmare continued. The belt wouldn't let him go. Linda's screams were cut off in the dark night beyond the car as he fought with that buckle, twisting at the straps, struggling to be free. The nightmare continued. "He's coming around," a voice said through the thick blackness and the terror. The horror retreated slightly, only to be replaced by the memory of Charon Base and another nightmare. A nightmare of a mission gone bad. "Good," another voice said from his other side. "Did you get anything?" "Nothing of any worth." John Cray struggled back to the reality, the sounds of Linda's screams still echoing in his mind. He was totally nude, with large straps holding his arms and legs like firm, rough hands. Another strap held his forehead tight against the back of a huge padded chair. Tubes ran from both his arms, the area above his heart, and the sides of both legs to nearby machines. His penis and balls were encased in what looked to be a large suction hose that extended under his ass. 3 needle inserts had been stuck into his brain, and a mass of wires ran from them to something he couldn't see behind him. "He still denies everything," Larson said. "And he is somehow blocking the mind probes." Cray opened his eyes, letting the image of Linda go for a moment. In front of him stood Professor Kleist in a white smock. He looked huge, like a white judge standing at the pearly gates as Linda's screams faded totally away in the back of his mind. The professor smiled when he noticed that Cray's eyes were open. He knelt down so that he could look at his captive directly. "Why are you doing this?" Cray just blinked, not responding. He tried to think of the good times with Linda, but they just wouldn't come. Only being trapped by that seatbelt in the middle of that awful night. It was the only thought of her that he had at the moment. "We know you're not really working for ZCT, but for Grant Corporation, so you can stop pretending. Just tell us what you know, and you'll die painlessly. I can promise you that." Cray thought of how he had finally freed himself from the seatbelt during that awful night. It had been too dark to follow Linda and the alien's tracks, but he had still tried, over and over, scrambling through the brush and trees, calling her name, begging for her to be all right. But he never saw her again, and her body was never found. He had been sitting in the middle of the road, shouting and crying, when the marine transport had picked him up. The professor glanced up over Cray's shoulder at Larson. Then, disgusted, he turned back to Cray. "Continue to try my patience, and you'll suffer beyond all imagining." Cray focused on the professor. I don't know. Don't know what you want." The professor leaned back and half smiled. "Then I will tell you exactly what we know, and what we want." He again glanced over Cray's shoulder, and then back at Cray. "I will grant you," he said, "that your plan was an audacious one. I admire that, to be honest with you, especially the hollow of my old friend at headquarters. I'm amazed that he could keep a straight face when he was doing that for you. I even bet you were sitting in his office watching him record it, weren't you?" Kleist smiled as Cray fought to keep the memory of that day in the ZCT headquarters from his mind, but from the look on the professor's face, he hadn't succeeded. "You were hoping," the professor said after glancing again over Cray's shoulder, To make me so paranoid about infiltration that I'd hand you the Chimera Project data without a second thought. The professor laughed hard and sharp, and then moved closer to Cray so he was looking him directly in the eye. Cray noticed the professor's breath smelled dirty and sour, as if his insides were rotting out. He could only wish. You made one fatal mistake a long time ago, the professor said, grinning right in Cray's face, gloating with brown teeth just inches from Cray's face. ZCT agents above grade 9 have a security code surface-coated on their right kidney. You, a supposed grade 12, do not. That was clear when we checked you in decontamination when you first walked onto the station. Cray struggled to think of his wife, of the night she died, anything but the implications of what the professor had said. Kleist leaned back and laughed for what seemed to be much too long. Finally, he caught his breath and faced Cray straight on again. That's right. We've known you worked for the Grant Corporation all along. For years now. We let you feed us that taser and gel data to get our trust. Wasn't that nice of us? Again he laughed, but this time he cut it off quickly. We wanted to know what you were after, who your contacts were. We've netted quite a haul, thanks to you, including Captain Palmer. Cray fought against the belts to sit upright. No, she's not. The professor laughed. I may be as mad as they all say I am, but I'm not stupid. He nodded to Larson, who moved around into Cray's line of sight. He was carrying a square box with instruments attached to one side. We even came up with a plan to get you out here, away from any support you might have in the corporation. We even made it seem as if it was your idea. We needed you here so you'd tell us everything you know. And trust me, you will tell us. The professor glanced at Larson and nodded. Then he stared directly into Cray's eyes. Otherwise, you'll soon discover there is such a thing as a fate worse than death. Larson turned the box and held it inches from Cray's face so that Cray could look directly into the small window. Then he turned the box so Cray could look directly into the slime-covered underside of an alien facehugger. He turned the box so that Cray could see his own living death. No! Cray screamed as the box got closer. He fought against the belts on the chair, fought against the seatbelt as Linda was hauled through the window of the car, fought against the thought of that thing on his face. He lost all 3 fights, and the nightmare continued.